Namaste children, welcome back again to this virtual class. So in today's episode we will be learning a new chapter of your class 10th science bio portion, that is how do organisms reproduce. About reproduction only we will be seeing, and before going to start this we should know what is reproduction and what is the need for a living organism to undergo reproduction. Now firstly, reproduction means the process by which a living organism creates or give birth to a young one of its own kind. So you are much familiar about reproduction and all, you must have studied in the lower classes. So we will be seeing in detail about how reproduction takes place. Now the question is, what is the need for a living organism to undergo reproduction? Is it mandatory for every living organism to undergo reproduction? Is the reproduction a vital life process? We have learned in the previous chapter about the life processes such as nutrition, respiration, circulation, excretion. All these are very important for every living organism to survive. Whereas the reproduction is not at all mandatory for a living organism. Although it is not necessary for maintaining a healthy life cycle, why do the living organisms reproduce then? For reproduction, lot of energy needs to be spent. Then why the living organism spends energy in the reproduction process, although it is not vital for the life cycle or maintaining life of living organism? This is very important. Let us understand all this in detail. So we know that reproduction is a process by which every living organism gives birth to young one of its own kind. This we call it as reproduction. Let us understand the importance or significance of reproduction in detail. Now let us take example of lizard. You are much familiar with lizard in your home, right? Now if the lizard would have not reproduced, then we cannot notice, we will not be noticing the existence of lizard now. The lizard originated very long back. Due to giving birth of new individual, the generation of lizard has been sustained for a long time, right? If reproduction has not taken place for the past generation, then we would have not noticed the existence of lizard. Now we are able to see various types of living organisms because of reproduction. If no reproduction, we would not find the importance of living organism. We cannot ultimately see the living organism. So in order to make the versatility or varied population or varied species that exist in the earth is a result of reproduction. So reproduction is very important in carrying offspring from one generation to another generation. If no reproduction, then we will not see the offspring from at a different stage or different generations. So I believe you understood what is the importance of reproduction. If no reproduction, then we will not see the living organisms. Once again, in order to see the organism continuously for a long time, reproduction is the one that has to be carried out in all the living organisms. Now let us understand how reproduction takes place.
Organisms look similar because their body designs are similar. If body designs are to be similar, the blueprints for these designs should be similar. Thus, reproduction at its most basic level will involve making copies of the blueprints of the body design.
Now the reproduction, when we talk about reproduction, it is creating a copy of the parent to the child. In the lower classes in 9th standard you must have studied DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid is the source of information which produces protein. So this is a kind of protein where all the information about the organism is stored.
Therefore, a basic event in reproduction is the creation of a DNA copy. Cells use chemical reactions to build copies of their DNA. This creates two copies of the DNA in a reproducing cell, and they will need to be separated from each other. However, keeping one copy of DNA in the original cell and simply pushing the other one out would not work, because the copy pushed out would not have any organized cellular structure for maintaining life processes. Therefore, DNA copying is accompanied by the creation of an additional cellular apparatus, and then the DNA copies separate, each with its own cellular apparatus. By this way, a cell divides to give rise to two cells. These two cells are of course similar, but are they likely to be absolutely identical?
If the DNA is copied from the parent to the child exactly, we can say that here DNA copying is a type of blueprint. If the blueprint is perfect, then the offspring so produced will be perfect. So this way we can understand that the copying process is very important for reproduction. If the copying process is done perfectly without any hindrance or without any difficulty, then the new individual so formed will be exactly as that of the parent. So this way a new individual is being given birth during reproduction.
Populations of organisms get into well-defined places, we call it as niches, in the ecosystem using their ability to reproduce. The consistency of DNA copying during reproduction is important for the maintenance of the body design features that allow the organism to use that particular niche. Reproduction is therefore linked to a stability of populations of species. However, niches can change because of reasons behind the control of the organism. For example, temperatures on the earth can go up or down, water levels can vary, and so on. If a population of reproducing organisms were suited to a particular niche, and if the niche were drastically altered, the population could be wiped out. However, if some variations were to be present in a few individuals in these populations, there would be some chance for them to survive. So variation is very useful for the survival of species over time in various conditions.
So this is what reproduction is. Now the question is how the reproduction takes place. What are the various ways by which the reproduction takes place in living organisms? When we talk about living organisms, all the living organisms are not alike. We see unicellular organism, we see multicellular organism. When we talk about multicellular organism, we see plants, animals. In plants also, under plants various categories are there, and under animals also we see various categories, right? So the reproduction, the process of reproduction in all the living organisms are same or common. We can say that it is the copying of a DNA, but the copying process changes organism to organism. Now let us see the reproduction process in all the living organisms. Now the reproduction process is broadly classified into two categories. They are sexual reproduction and another one is asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, what happens? Only one individual is involved. The DNA copying process take place or restricted between parent and the child. Only one parent is involved in copying or in creating a new individual of its own kind. So such a reproduction process in which only one individual is involved, such a type of reproduction we call it as asexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, two parents are involved. One we call it as
Male
and another one we call it as
female.
So copying process takes place between two cells. About that we will see later. First we will see what are the various ways by which asexual reproduction could be carried out. The first type of asexual reproduction we see in case of unicellular organism, that is fission. Let us see the reproduction in unicellular organism. Firstly we take amoeba is one of the example of unicellular organism. How reproduction takes place, about that we will see. Now here in amoeba you can see on the screen, it develops. When it gets maturity, then at that point what happens, the nucleus initially divides into two, as you can see on the screen. When the nucleus splitted into two, then the entire organism, that is the amoeba, gets into two daughter cells. So here you can see very well that only one parent is involved. On the other side you see two daughter cells. So here a single organism splits into two. So when a single organism gives rise to two daughter cells, we call it as, here fission takes place. Fission means splitting. Single organism splitted into two, we call it as binary fission. Bi means two, fission means split. When a living organism is split into two new daughter cells, we call it as binary fission. So amoeba reproduces by means of binary fission. Yet another type of fission we call it as multiple fission. In case of plasmodium, you are much familiar with malaria causing protozoa, it is the Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium prolifera we call it as. So two types of Plasmodiums are there. The Plasmodium, the malaria causing agent, reproduces by means of multiple fission. Here what happens when the Plasmodium enters into our body, into our blood, there due to proper nutrition, what happens, they matures. On maturation, what happens, they split into many daughter cells. So Plasmodium is one such example which reproduces by means of multiple fission. So as you can see here, so fission, whether it is a binary fission or multiple fission, they are one of the mode of asexual reproduction. Now we will see the second type of reproduction. So in binary fission and multiple fission, we have seen a single organism gives rise to two or many daughter cells. We call it as a fission, binary fission or a multiple fission. There are certain organisms which when cut into several pieces, each piece grow into a new organism. We call it as fragmentation. See here, this is an example, Spirogyra. When you see the stagnated water, a green color patches you will see. If you take it, a thread-like structure you could see, right? So that is what we call it as Spirogyra, or algae, we call it as algae, the green color patches, right? So that is a Spirogyra. When Spirogyra is cut into several pieces, then each piece is capable of growing into a new organism. So here each piece we call it as fragment, and each fragment grows as a new individual or new organism. So we call it as fragmentation. So fragmentation is one of the asexual mode of reproduction where only one parent is involved. So when we talk about asexual reproduction, you always keep in mind that only one parent will be involved in the reproduction process. So fragmentation is one of the asexual mode of reproduction. Regeneration is a process in which when a living organism is cut into pieces, then each piece will grow as a new individual. The same thing we have seen in fragmentation, right? So what will be the difference between fragmentation and regeneration? Here the cutting process, here all the pieces will not grow into a new individual. In case of regeneration, here when the organism is cut from a germ cell, then that piece will grow into a new individual. One of the example is planaria.
We are going to cut the planaria to know the regeneration process. Now the planaria is cut into two halves. Now you see they are tail and head, both the portions are available, right? Now it is magnified up to 10x. Head is moving and at the same time the tail is also in motion, but they are cut into two halves. On the day of amputation, the condition of the tail you can see on the screen. The tail is not dead, still it is in motion. First day after amputation, the state of tail you can see here, the tail is in motion. Now you see 2 days after amputation, the state of tail, still it is in motion, not dead. Now 3 days after amputation, now the tail has got some changes and you can see some motion also. Four days after amputation, you see the tail has got, they are freely moving and some structure is also appearing on its body. The head is taking shape and both eyes are present after 4 days. Now planaria has got eyes and head. However, this organism was developed from the tail which was cut 5 days before. So Now you see on 7th day after amputation, the tail becomes a fully developed matured planaria. Now it is moving very freely. Now you see on the day of amputation, the state of head, the cut portion you could see very clearly, right? Head is in motion but proper tail is not there with the planaria. First day after amputation, the head, you see the condition of head, the tail, the cut portion is slowly invisible, the mark is not visible, right? 2 days after amputation, you see the tail, the cut portion is almost completely invisible, so the mark is not so clearly visible. The state of head after 3 days of amputation, you see on 4th day of amputation, you can see a complete structure of the planaria, no visible sign of cut. 5 days after amputation, now the head becomes changed to a complete planaria, no mark in the tail position or the cut position. So after 7 days of amputation, you can see the head becomes a complete fully matured planaria. So after 7 days of amputation, we have got 2 genetically identical planaria that came from one worm. So one organism was earlier 7 days before cut into 2 pieces and each piece grown into a new organism. This is what the regeneration process is.
A living organism is cut into many pieces and each piece will grow as a new individual. We call it as regeneration. Hydra is one of the example which reproduces by budding. Now look at the screen here. When the Hydra grows, at the side you can see a bulb-like structure. We call it as bud. Initially, the bud gets developed on the surface on maturity. Then slowly what happens, the buds get developed further into bigger and bigger. Once the bud matures completely, then the bud grows as a new individual and the bud gets detached from the parent body and they can grow as a new individual independently without the support of the parent. So such type of reproduction which takes place by means of bud, we call it as budding. And the example of budding is Hydra. In Hydra, the Hydra reproduces by means of budding. Vegetative propagation is a type of reproduction mostly takes place in plants which takes place from the vegetative part of the plants. We know that the vegetative part are leaves, stem, roots. These are the vegetative parts. When the living organism grows from these one of these vegetative part, we call it as vegetative propagation. Let us see one by one. The vegetative propagation by means of leaves. Bryophyllum is one of the example. As you can see, the same thing you may be having in your school or in your surroundings. So bryophyllum is one of the example which reproduces through the leaves. So leaf is a vegetative part and the reproduction takes place by the leaves. You can see on the screen bryophyllum. At the edges of the leaves you can find the nodes and each node contains regenerative cell or germ cell. When the nodes of the leaves get a suitable condition or exposed to suitable condition, then each node will grow as a new individual. So this is how the reproduction takes place in case of bryophyllum, through the leaves. The second way by which vegetative propagation takes place is by means of stem. You are much familiar with China rose, hibiscus we call, and rose plants. These plants can grow from their stems, right? When the stem is cut and planted, then from the stem the plant grows, a new individual comes out, right? So this is one of the example of the vegetative propagation by means of stem. Third one is vegetative propagation by roots. You are much familiar with the roots. Can you name some of the examples where the reproduction or new plants come out from their roots?
Sweet potato, garlic, onion bulb are some examples of plants that reproduce by roots. If you look at the surface of sweet potato, then you will see some nodes on certain places. This node contains germ cells capable of germinating to a new plant. If you bury any of these nodes of sweet potato, which is typically a root, grows to a new plant.
So this way reproduction takes place by roots also. So altogether we can say that vegetative propagation can take place by three means. One is through leaves, through stems, and through roots. When the reproduction takes place by using the vegetative part, we call it as vegetative propagation.
There are various advantages of vegetative propagation in the field of agriculture or in the field of flowering plants or fruits. Firstly, plants raised by vegetative propagation can bear flowers and fruits earlier than those produced from seeds. So, in much shorter duration of time, the plants give flowers and fruits. So, this is one of the most important advantage of vegetative propagation. Secondly, the flowers and the fruits so produced by vegetative propagation are of superior quality. High quality flowers and fruits will be produced by vegetative propagation. Another advantage of vegetative propagation is that all plants produced are genetically similar enough to the parent plant to have all its characteristics. Next one is desirable character of fruit can be maintained, and it helps in the preservation of useful parent characters in the next generation. So the required characters in a particular plant, whether it may be a type of flowers or it may be some characters in the fruits, all such important characteristics in the plant can be preserved for the next generation. So these are some of the most important advantages of vegetative propagation. Grafting is a technique used to join plant parts from two or more plants so that they appear to grow as a single plant. In grafting, the upper part is also known as scion of one plant grows on the root system of another plant. We call it as root stock. Examples of the plants grown by grafting method are fruiting trees, for example mango, chiku, and so on. Likewise, flowering plants can also be grafted, for example hibiscus is there, roses are there. So these are the plants which can be grown by grafting method. Reproduction by grafting has some added advantages. Let us see the advantages. Firstly, grafting is the fastest way of growing popular desirable varieties of fruiting trees and flowering plants on a large scale. So on a commercial purpose also the grafting can be used. Secondly, many commercially valuable plants are very difficult to grow by other propagation methods, for example layering, cutting and all, but by grafting it can be achieved. Layering is also a technique of vegetative propagation of obtaining desirable plants with various characteristics. The process of layering is somewhat different from that of grafting. A low growing stem is bent down to touch a hole dug in the ground, as you can see, then pinned in place using something shaped like a clothes hanger hook and covered over with soil. However, a few inches of leafy growth must remain above the ground for the bent stem to grow into a new plant. Removing a section of skin from the lower facing stem part before burying may help the rooting process. The buried stem part then grows new roots which take hold in the soil while the above parts grow as individual new plants. Once the process is completed, the buried section should be kept well watered until roots begin to form. Examples of plants grown by layering methods are strawberries and raspberries are the plants which are layered. Plants grown by layering has also some added advantages. Firstly, the parent plant supplies the new individual with water and food along with the hormones also until it makes its own food and hormones. Particularly auxin is the hormone required for its growth. So initially the parent plant supplies everything needed for the layered plant. Secondly, comparatively bigger plants could be obtained through layering in a short period of time.
Spore formation is one of the asexual reproduction. Let us understand it in detail. Now look at the screen here. You will find a spongy layer developed on the surface of the bread. This occurs when the bread is exposed to moist air for some days. When it is left for some days, after 2 or 3 days, you will see such type of a spongy layer. Here the reproduction is
by means of spore formation. What is this spore formation actually? This type of spore formation is mostly seen in rhizopus, that is a fungus which you see on the surface of the bread slice. Rhizopus body is made up of thread-like structures called hyphae. The erect hyphae bear sporangia inside which reproductive structures called spores are formed.
Followed by the stick. On the top of the stick you can see a ball-like structure. This ball-like structure is called sporangium. A plural form of sporangium is sporangia. Within the sporangia many cells are there, we call it as spores. When on maturation, when the ball-like structure, that is sporangium, bursts out, then the spores tend to come out. Due to wind or any other agent, the spores fly away in the air. The spores land on different environment. When they get a suitable environment for its growth, then each spore grows as a new individual. So this is how the spore formation or reproduction takes place by means of spore formation. So that's all we have for today's session. On the basis of today's learning, let me give you some easy home assignments which you can practice at home. So here is your home assignment. Hope you will do all these home assignments very easily. See you all on another day where we will be learning about sexual reproduction in animals. Till then, keep learning. Take good care of yourself. Bye.